Hi, my name is Nora Shitandi, and to begin my speech, I want to show you a picture of a company that some of you may or may not recognize. It's kind of a small, family-owned business. After this slide. So I lied. This is obviously Disney. And raise your hand if you know Disney's slogan. So a few of you. Disneyland's slogan, or one of them, is the happiest place on earth. And this is what most of their marketing revolves around. But the happiest place on earth, really? With the long lines and the screaming children and the prices that make your wallet cry? I'm sure many parents disagree with this claim. But Disneyland continues to see sales. In 2019, according to Statistica, Disneyland saw 155 million visitors to their parks. So why is this business model so successful? Because they capitalized on your innate desire to be happy. And in fact, happiness is sold to us in different forms in our institutions, in our media, and in our personal lives. Dr. Iris Moss, professor of psychology for the University of California, would describe this as the happiness paradox. Her research finds the more that we do things in pursuit of happiness, the more our long-term well-being suffers. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because we live in a society that views happiness as something to achieve, almost like a commodity. And in the process of trying to gain it, we become further from it. So first, we will discuss why we feel the need to search for happiness. Then next, we will talk about the results of our endless search. And finally, we will discover how we can truly live happier, healthier lives. Now first, I want to convince you how prevalent our pursuit of happiness really is. It's easy to believe that you may be immune from happiness hunting. But TED Education speaker Shawn Achor points out that our schools and our companies follow a specific formula for success that follows this pattern. If I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, I will be happier. This underpins most of our managing and our parenting styles, and it motivates a lot of our behavior. In fact, the world was taken by storm last March when influencer and celebrity Kim Kardashian stood up in front of a panel of businesswomen and stated, "It seems like nobody wants to work anymore. Get off your effing butt and work." And while personally I don't think of the Kardashians as the pinnacle of hard workers, this mindset represents a greater problem in our society, what Forbes writer Julie Ball coins as hustle culture. This is the idea that we constantly have to do more, have a better job, make more money, and be more successful in order to be happy. Noise. Be more successful in order to be happy. However, according to Ball, in a culture that glorifies workaholics and busyness, all that waits at the finish line is burnout. According to Peter Stearns, writer for Harvard Business Review, our desire for happiness that partially drives this hustle culture may not be as innate as we believe that it is. The Enlightenment, an 18th century movement, represented a turn in Western ideals. Preceding the Enlightenment, Western culture, if anything, encouraged a kind of melancholic approach towards life. However, after the Enlightenment, the pursuit of happiness became a worthy goal, and in the process, unhappiness a problem to be avoided. I mean, think about our three unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you, Thomas Jefferson. These are a direct result of Enlightenment ideals still ingrained in our society today. However, the problem arises, as outlined by Dr. Patrick Wanis, when we constantly chase happiness in this manner. We make it a constantly moving target. We place our happiness somewhere in the future so that we are unable to be happy in the present because we believe we have to do, be, or have something in order to be happy. Additionally, if happiness constantly lies on the other side of that achievement or success, our brain never gets there because we're moving the goalpost. So in a society where we experience more material benefit than our ancestors could have ever dreamed of, our continuous pursuit of happiness doesn't allow us to be any happier. So I want to share with you a little bit about my own pursuit of happiness. This is a picture from my journal in about October of 2022. And I was talking about going to a national tournament, UKTOC, the University of Kentucky Tournament of Champions for Speech and Debate. And I said, I'm going to UKTOC. Being a national champion would be great for my college applications and for my self-worth. Now, I tied my happiness to 2 different outcomes. First, being a national champion, which was an unrealistic goal. But second, being able to put that onto my college applications so that I could bring happiness, or so that I could derive happiness from hopefully getting into prestigious university. I tied my self-worth and my success and my happiness together. And many high-achieving students can relate to this path, where they're pushed into getting good grades, to go to a good college, to hopefully have a good job or career. This is especially true for children of immigrant parents, who are told to put aside their parents, who are told to put aside their own happiness in order to make their parents' trials and tribulations worth it in the form of grandiose accomplishments. However, as Virginia-based therapist Susan J. Bonivia points out, the more that we grasp at happiness in this manner, the more that it becomes more shallow, elusive, and unsustaining. Furthermore, when we're constantly chasing our happiness, when we finally achieve that goal, the happiness that we may receive may not last for as long as we think it will. In a theory called the hedonic treadmill, as coined by psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald T. Campbell, states that regardless of our external circumstances, as long as our basic needs are met, our happiness level rarely deviates. A study corroborating this claim examined 2 groups, first lottery winners and the second accident victims, and found that in the long run, neither group exhibited a higher level of happiness than the other. So if we constantly expect our big wins to give us everlasting happiness, we will be lastingly disappointed. So now we know how not to be happy. Now what? Because how are we supposed to be happier as a society if we cannot pursue it? Well, Ariana Grande would say, to be happy, get loaded, stating, whoever said money doesn't solve your problems didn't have enough money to solve them. But it's not exactly radical or profound to state that money isn't the key to happiness. So amidst this pandemic of unhappiness, how do we truly find it? Well, writer for Sitecom, Jennifer Zez, poses the idea of reimagining happiness. This could be seen in a multitude of different ways, such as practicing self-acceptance, cultivating gratitude, and creating relationships with others. Now, I interviewed a few people in my life to see what happiness meant to them. One person said, the feeling you get from knowing that you are doing all you can for making the right decisions. Now, they didn't necessarily base their happiness in necessarily the decision being right, but the effort that they made in order to make that decision. Another person said, the fulfillment of long or short-term goals, ultimately looking for peace of mind and getting closer to that makes me happy. And I know in some of my speech, I've been talking about how goals might make you unhappy because you're constantly expecting them to bring you happiness. But I'm here to tell you that goals aren't necessarily the enemy of happiness. It's just making sure that when you're achieving your goals, you find a way to be happy in the process of achieving those goals. Another person said, happiness for me means being loved. And this person talked a lot about being surrounded by a community who they felt love from, and they can reciprocate that love back to. Another person said, it's kind of hard to describe a feeling, like, and how many of you relate to that? If I would have asked you, what does happiness mean to you? It's a little bit hard to actually know what that actually means and to be able to describe it for someone. But this last person had an answer immediately. Spending time with those I love or doing what I love. And this really brings us back to a sense of happiness that a lot of us have had for the longest time. Going back to our childhood, maybe childhood hobbies, spending time with our parents or our family, activities that might get lost in the everyday hustle and bustle of life. And so back to the psychologist, Jennifer Zez says, most importantly, we must see happiness not as a future goal, but simply as a state of being. Now, Zez, along with other psychologists, outline 2 key ways in which we can be happier as a society. First, pursue your passions. Figure out what gets you up in the morning, what makes you tick, and follow that. Retired legal attorney Emily Baker takes the liberty to discuss when she found out that her dream career did not provide her with a happy or healthy lifestyle. So instead of following glamorized lifestyles, figure out what gives you meaning individually. And second, stop chasing pleasure. Ancient religions such as Buddhism and neuroscientists such as Dr. Robert Lustig have figured out that pleasure is not happiness. All pleasure is dopamine in the brain, and all dopamine wants is more dopamine. So instead of chasing your happiness high, find solace in meaning and fulfillment. And finally, I want to show you this image. Now you might be wondering why I'm showing you what looks like a stock photo of a mailman, but my friend and I came up with this analogy. Let's say that you wanted to be happier. You would live in this house, the contentment house, filled with things and people that you are passionate about. And every so often, you would get a visit from the mailman, the happiness mailman, and he would bring you your mail at irregular times in irregular forms. Now let's say you decided that you didn't want to live in the happiness house. Now in order to obtain in the contentment house, now in order to obtain your happiness, you would have to chase the happiness mailman, and he's a hard person to catch. He's always on the move, and so you will rarely, if ever, get your happiness mail. So the best way to be happy is to first learn to be content. And this doesn't necessarily mean being complacent. It just means to learn not to pursue happiness in whatever form. And so I want to tell you a little bit about what belongs in my contentment house. First, I got into art recently, and I started knitting. And as you see over here, I made a scarf, and it was way too big to functionally wear. You can see a little bit of the disappointment on my face. But I didn't mind, because the process of making the scarf was 100% worth it. And second, sewing. And so my mom, after telling me that she would not spend $500 on a prom dress for one night, told me that I'd have to find another solution. And I decided to make it myself. And every single step of the process was fulfilling, and I enjoyed it completely. And next, public speaking, especially advocacy. This past week, I went to Arkansas Girls State, and I ran to be governor. And during this process, I got to speak to hundreds of girls, and I ran on a platform of female empowerment, especially for civic involvement. And throughout that, I figured out that I had not only a love for public speaking, but that I enjoyed every single time I got to get on the stage, regardless of the outcome. And so I don't know what belongs in your contentment house and what will make you happy as an individual. Maybe it's a walk in the park, maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's a cheese board. But what I can tell you won't make you happy is checking off all the boxes on your never-ending achievement list, or buying your happiness, or expecting to be happy in the future. Buddha once said that happiness is the destination, is the journey, not the destination. So find a way to be happy every single step of your life, because the pursuit of happiness is a sentence to unhappiness. Thank you.